So throughout the month of November, I am talking to my men people, about issues that are unique to men, that are happening kind of around us right now, unique to men, but impactful to all of us, quite frankly. And you know, there are so many, there's so much going on in the world, good and bad, and I think there's a lot of issues that men are facing, and that they face them fairly silently, quite often. So I wanted to not be silent about it and have these conversations, even if they're not things I'm used to talking about. So today I'm talking to my friend Jonathan, who is also a client of mine. I just wanted to chat with him about how he views the world as a dad, and as a tech guy, and as a politician, all the things, right? So Jonathan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you and I will just dive in and chat.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, can I amend that? Can we edit that in post to say recovering politician?
Yes.
I still read the news, but probably shouldn't. Yeah, so I'm a middle-aged man who's married with three kids, two girls and a boy. The oldest is in college, a 10th grader, and then one that's just entering middle school, which is has been fun. Been in tech for my whole professional career, and yeah, I would say that the middle schooler coming into tech has been interesting. I mean, coming into middle school has been interesting because he's really starting to enter into the who am I as a male identified figure in the world, and yeah, he shares my love of dance and
Awesome. I love
singing,
it.
and so he is one of his activities is doing that. But it's very interesting seeing him sort of land and
And
find his
navigate.
place. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like to play soccer. I like to throw fits on the soccer field as a middle-aged person who used to be healthier. I like to read books, uh, and
Nice.
listen to podcasts, fun things like that.
Awesome. Awesome. No, I love it. And I think what you just shared about, like as a man now watching your son enter this particular phase of his life, I think that's also, there's some real education there, as well as having raised daughters, and being in the act of raising daughters. So I think there's some really interesting stuff there, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. Plus I know, like, you're a pretty open guy. Like, having gotten to know you, you're pretty open, you're fairly self-reflective, you understand the power of privilege and those things. And so this, for me, this was an interesting conversation to have, because I think, there are a handful of statistics that are really standing out to me right now. One is the fact that boys are falling behind in school, right? They're just falling behind, and girls are getting more degrees, right? Just by and large are doing better, getting higher scores, less dropouts, and getting more degrees globally, not even just in the US. And then there is, like, just the crisis of men not going to the doctor when they need to go to the doctor, right? They go about a third of the amount of times that women go, between
Wow.
the ages of 16 and 60, right? And which is insane. I mean, I know that women have, we have pregnancy and all these other things, but that's a really low number, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then we have the problem of men killing themselves and men killing women, right? And so, like, these two, there's so much kind of packed into what it means right now to be a man or a boy.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to talk to you about, like, what are you seeing? What are you thinking, having raised daughters, now raising a son?
Hmm.
You don't have to know all of those things, obviously, but there's just so much packed in right now in terms of the pressure of being a man or a boy. Um,
Yeah.
and what do you think causes that, I guess? Or where do you think how did we get here?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, it definitely feels multifaceted that there's a
Yeah.
lot of different pressures, and I think a lot of it depends upon many different things. When I'm sort of reflecting on what my son may be experiencing compared to what I did,
Yeah.
I'm from a very blue collar, pretty conservative, little c conservative
Hmm.
background where, you have the Protestant work ethic and the expectation that hard work generates results and, be the last one to leave, the first one to arrive, and all these pressures and of how to be successful. But the success, when I took the time to reflect as an adult, the success is highly predicated on material success,
Yeah.
the conventional expectations around masculinity, no awareness to your earlier highlight of privilege whatsoever. And but you just do what you have to do. You grin and bear it. You get hurt. You work through it.
Right. Don't
And
cry.
that is very different from where I'm at in the tech world.
Yeah.
I one of the conversations I had in the last week or two with some of my, I've recently brought on board to my team people new to the, or relatively new to the industry, they're
Hmm.
earlier stage
Hmm.
folks.
Hmm.
And, we were talking about working smarter versus working harder. And so that ethos of like, oh, we're going to work really hard to be successful. So when I reflect on those things, I think some of that stuff from my politician days is tied into the availability and cost of healthcare, at least
Yeah.
in the U.S., which I'm more familiar with. But I also think there's just the cultural expectations and the cultural pressures that we bring to bear on
Yeah.
folks who are male identified and are treated as such by the people around them.
Right.
And then it comes, you know, it can be teachers. My wife has been a teacher, and so we've talked about
Yeah.
why are young boys often the receivers of corrections and punishments, and some of that ties into activity levels and
Hmm.
prevalences of diagnoses around ADHD and energy levels, and
Yeah.
are they allowed to get physical activity as part of their
Right.
school day. And I
Right.
think all of that stuff ties
So much.
into, in each of those things adds maybe a percentage point here, a percentage point there, and it builds up. And then there's no, when I think about the emotional health, when we think about what does it take to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, but emotionally healthy, I didn't have good examples.
Yeah. Yeah.
There were zero examples or maybe they were a handful of examples of men dealing with emotional challenges in a way that was probably a good example of like
Yeah.
this is a healthy way to deal with this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the stoic, we're gonna grin and bear it. And then
Yeah.
if we do those things there, and maybe they're not being done publicly
Yeah.
within the household even,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's a real miss. And when I think about it, the first thing that comes to mind is sports, like seeing a
Yeah.
coach do that
Yeah.
in the speech to the team. I wrestled in high school, which is a team sport, but the coach there was a good leader and
Mhm.
had
Mhm.
a way with inspiring us as the team.
Right.
And but that was 14 or 15. That's a little late to start your
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah.
growth and
Emotional.
working on what it means to be a person,
Right.
and that's not even focused on that. It's focused again in
Yeah.
this other context.
Yeah.
It's not just on emotional work for emotion's sake.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a resource, but it's not necessarily that's not the reason for it existing. What's
Yeah,
interesting is as you talk, I get this mental image of like just the compounding pressure that we're putting on boys as they're growing up, and then not giving them the release valve to let the
yeah,
steam off, and
yeah,
then being shocked when they're violent or aggressive or lose their shit, right? Like we have
yeah.
these, it's like, well, you haven't given them any tools to say, hey, how do I release this energy?
Yeah, and I had a really interesting anecdote of a friend who was in the military,
Mhm.
striving to become a pilot, which is a high pressure
Yep.
job, and was interviewed when he was struggling, and they said, "What do you do for stress relief?" And he's like, "I play video games." They're like, that's not relieving your stress. You have to do something else that takes your mind off of that sort of competitive, that adrenaline space,
Yeah.
because he was looking to enter a field that was already that way.
Yeah.
And so I think you're really right. What are the avenues that are ways to do that? And some of those ways are sharing burdens and connecting, but that's countermand to the idea of being vulnerable. Like
Yeah.
being vulnerable is a
Yeah.
risk and it's a danger. And there was a very interesting back in the day Twitter thread that I participated in that somebody asked, what does it why did you not go down the red pill path? Why did you not go down
Right.
this path of externalizing your frustrations and pain? And I remember having experiences on chat rooms and AOL chat rooms in my early teens that were impactful for me to reject and start to move away from that path, because that was one that I could see myself,
Yeah.
traveling down at that time.
Yeah.
And it's because you can be an online troll and nobody's
Yeah.
gonna, nobody knows that you're, an
Yeah.
immature person on the other side.
Yeah.
You're just getting to play. And sometimes that play is actually hurtful, but
Yeah.
it is one of those, it's a big question, is how do we grow people in a way that is wholesome and fulsome and
Yeah.
allows them to do, to navigate these pressures? Because I don't think we're going to reduce the pressures in and of itself, but we can build resiliency, you
Right,
know.
right. And make it possible. One of the things that's common in some of these conversations I'm having is men talking about the risk, the using the words like risk and high stakes when we're just talking about having conversations.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. The part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation is that I'm like, is it really that dangerous? But it feels dangerous to men.
Um, this is, yeah, I have to be respectful of other conversations I've had, but they've had
No,
some
of
recent
course, of
ones
course. Yeah.
that are really interesting here, which is reflecting on um, how equality is threatening because of the
Mhm.
responsibility that can come along with it
Yeah.
when we talk about an equal relationship. And my partner and I were reflecting on this that because we had an amazing experience last year. She had a major surgery, was
Mhm.
out for a full week. She was in recovering in the hospital,
Yeah.
which meant that I was working with, you know, the kids and handling their emotional, you know, sort of, you know, disruption that occurred
Fear,
because of her
uncertainty, doubt.
absence.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And then she came home and she was on medication, which impacted her. She was still not emotionally
Right.
available. So it was at
Right.
least 2 weeks for our children to have to rely on me. And I was like, oh my goodness, so much emotional work, you know, so much responsibility that
Right.
she had carried without me even being, even though I had attempted and aspired to being somebody who was there and doing, you know, equal shares of the work. I might be doing the laundry. I might
Right.
be cooking in the kitchen. I might be cleaning the house, but
Right.
I wasn't tending to the emotional valence of the children. Where are
Mhm.
they at? What's their challenges that they're facing? What support do
Yeah.
they need to be resilient and successful?
Mhm.
And whatever their challenges of the day are, whether it's,
Yeah.
you know, how to share appropriately at the earliest stages or
Yeah.
whatever. But we were reflecting on how we have other folks in our lives who that's not what they aspire to. They have very rigid,
Yeah.
conventional roles.
Right.
And the risk of that role for the man is that he doesn't have to be emotionally capable. He can just use two emotions,
Yeah.
stoicism
Yeah.
and then anger.
Yeah.
And relying on that anger is just throwing fit. It's really throwing man fits.
Yeah.
And so
Little tiny man, baby fits.
and so we were reflecting on how the people on the other side of that who have the emotional skills of those partners,
Yeah.
they get to sort of dictate and manipulate the circumstances to what they're in a position of power,
Mhm.
even
Yeah.
though
Yeah.
from a conventional patriarchal, it may not look like that, and they don't want to give that up
No.
because
Yeah.
now you have to work on equal footing, and it's just messy and it's difficult
Hard.
and it
Yeah.
takes time.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that ties into something you alluded to before, which is the biggest risk to a woman is her partner,
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of her health risk,
Yeah.
and when it comes to that sense of again fear and uncertainty and doubt and anger when they feel like they're losing any power.
Yeah.
And so it's yeah, it's just it's heart-wrenching because you hear and see about it all the time. I actually heard about it last Friday. Somebody who the person was trying to leave, and the spouse, ended up taking their partner's life and then their own.
Yeah.
And that's the type of stuff that really is it feels like if we just did a little bit more work as a culture to
Yeah.
help people navigate these challenges and recognize that other people are autonomous human beings who we have to
Yeah.
respect fully,
Yeah.
that it would address that. But it's easier said than done for sure.
What you just mentioned is so important. Like the numbers are astounding. I was pulling new statistics, trying to look at the statistics again this week, and women are, the homicides among women are 55 to 60% is the estimate that are their partner or another family member, right? This is
Yeah,
among women and girls.
yeah,
For men, it's 12%
yeah,
of known, they're murdered by people who know them in their, what they call the personal realm, right?
yeah,
12% to
yeah,
60.
yeah. It's these are a lot of the numbers. I didn't know those specific numbers, but the
I
scale
didn't.
and the
Yeah.
discrepancy, it is just when I was serving in the legislature to be aware of how much this is impacting folks, you realize how brittle and how brittle the the emotional skills are of the folks who find themselves in these circumstances and how
Yeah.
they feel just so disconnected. And so
Yeah.
their only sense of control that they feel like they can exercise is that physical violence.
Yeah.
And only people that they have the opportunity to do that with, those are the people closest to them.
Yeah. And I think what's
Sadly.
interesting is I think it is such a cycle, right? Because I think
Yeah.
what happens is that when women are afraid, then we flinch away from even good men,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then those
Mm-hmm.
men sometimes get angry because don't
Mm-hmm.
flinch, I'm a good man,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then if they get angry enough, they become an ungood man,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so you end up in this cycle where women are sort of prepared.
Mm-hmm.
We walk around armored, and I'm
Yeah,
sure
you
you've
have to
had to
be.
teach your daughters to be armored. I'm sure you've had to, like, and your
Mm-hmm.
partner, like, how do you walk in the world with a little bit of armor and prepared and paying attention, and are you looking ahead, and are you, head up, eyes up, right? Always.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, but I think it does then perpetuate because we as women then are, I know that for myself, I'm a little harsher. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I think a man is gonna take advantage of anything with me, I'm quicker. So then I come off as shrill, right? So you start ending up in these cycles that neither side wants to be in.
Yeah, it is, and I think that I'm a very very what's the right word here? It's science-based, like
Yeah.
neuroscience,
Sure.
whatever, that we've got
Yes.
our mirror neurons. And
Hmm.
so if somebody's in a position of stress and anxiety and maybe having their guard up,
Yeah.
one of the hardest things we can do is to hold space for that person to have their reaction without being reactive.
Right.
And because that is what we're made to do, is sort of hunter-gatherer society of
Yep.
whatever we've evolved to be. We're made to mirror. We're made to, I'm there with you. I am feeling what you're feeling. I'm having empathy or sympathy for,
Yeah.
for the most part, for
Yeah.
most people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, that's even a bigger emotional challenge. And I feel like it's the one that I'm, trying to most impart to my kids, is like, it took me to middle age to realize this is really, really important. That you're not responsible for other people's emotional state.
Right.
You're responsible for your own. And then what are good boundaries? How do you
Yeah.
hold those good boundaries when other folks are having a moment
Right.
that maybe you didn't have any part of being, being the catalyst for being,
Right.
it's just their moment. And then you can hold that space for them, but that doesn't mean you're responsible for fixing it.
Yeah.
It just means, and so I think you're right. It is a risk, especially in reactive spaces where, oh, that person is like this, well, then and then becomes an escalation.
Yeah.
And again, we're already at a disadvantage if we're not having those
Yeah.
expectations for
Yeah.
boys and as they're growing up anyway. And
Exactly.
yeah, it is fascinating, and it's one of the things that I think my partner and I, when we came together, that we've always loved working on and talking about. It's
Yeah.
made fun to parent around, but it is yeah, it is a challenge
Well,
for
it's a
sure.
challenge. I mean, I think what I hear you saying, and just having knowing you, I know that there is a challenge there, but part of what you have decided to do is talk about it,
Yeah.
right?
Oh
And
yeah.
you coming to the table as the male partner coming to the table and saying, "I will discuss this," is
Wow.
already, which sounds crazy to some of us who are like, why is that so hard? But it is such a big leap, even just for you as the male partner to come to the table and say, how are we gonna talk about this?
Ooh. Now we're getting into the spicy areas, because I think what you're really highlighting, for what comes to mind for me, is I have to acknowledge my failure modes that I've what I've grown up with and what
Sure.
the examples have, and then how I've internalized that. And when I'm doing that with people and I'm saying this is what's acceptable, I'm not living up to that ideal. And
Me
so then
either.
now and
Right.
now my kids are going, Dad, you sort of suck. And I'm like, you're right.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
exactly
Thank
correct.
you for the feedback, right?
This is unacceptable. Are we all on the same page,
Oh, absolutely.
And it doesn't change the fact, just because I logically know that it's not an acceptable way to react. And then it's up to the practice of actually following through that. And I've had to apologize and for the mistakes that I've made in our family dynamics, both in the immediate family with just the kids, but in the
Yeah.
greater family dynamics, because those are the greater family dynamics are what I grew up with,
Yeah. Yeah.
outside of just me, my wife, and my kids. And so the challenges are both what it was modeled for me,
Yes.
and so to say there's a standard, and this is the standard I hope to inspire us and talk about us
Right.
achieving,
Right.
and then to miss that standard. I think a lot of people, that
Yeah.
is just violates. How can you maintain authority with your children if you make mistakes and screw up in front of them? And I think the answer is, for us at least, is that by connecting with them authentically as a person,
Yes.
and acknowledging our failures, we're showing how we get better and how we can improve, and sometimes how we slide back and not improve and violate that trust. And so that is a thing that, it's actually something that I still worry about. I know my oldest is, like I mentioned, is in college. And there was a year, her senior year, where she was like, "I'm done with you," and I think some of that is a little bit of the
Yeah.
wanting to leave the nest type
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
thing. But some of that was her going, "You're not measuring up to the things you taught me
Mhm.
that I should look for,
Yeah.
and so I'm holding you accountable for that."
Yeah.
And there were times where she modeled the same bad behaviors that I've modeled. And one that stands out in my mind is she was very frustrated and she was yelling at me, and I was like, I don't think this one's about me.
Right.
you know, it was one of those days, and
Yeah.
and in that case, I think it wasn't. And
Yeah.
so, but
Yeah.
but that was where I was able to hold the space. I wasn't reactive to where she was,
Yeah.
so I was able to at least to follow through. I'm happy to share the good examples.
Right. Well, and I think this is one of those. I think what you just described. I'm thinking about being a teenage girl, and my dad was the man I could lash out on when I felt angry at men.
hmm
Right, and he could take it. He could hold it because he was tough enough, and he knew I was going to come home. Right,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
even in my 20s, I remember having conversations with him where I was just angry, and he was like, "Okay," and
yeah,
he could just let me be angry and say,
yeah,
welcome to being an adult."
yeah. You're not
Right, and I'm
wrong.
like, "You're the worst," right?
Yeah,
But I
you're
mean,
like accurate.
but it was such a listen, I won the dad lottery, so I can't complain. I mean, he had plenty of failings and ways he could have been better, but I won the dad lottery because he could say, "Yeah, I screwed that up." Right?
hmm
And just the and but that's I know that you and I as leaders,
Yes.
one of the ways I lead people is by saying, "Oh, I made a mistake."
Yeah.
I am quick with an apology, and I'm
Yeah.
quick to say, "Oh, that's me. That's on me. Everyone, look right here. That's on me, not them,
Yeah.
me." And when you do that, then people will raise their hand faster.
Yeah. It's
And it's
safety.
true in my teams. It's true in our families and among my friends. Like when I say, "Oh, hey, that was too far. I went too far."
Yeah. And I think now you're touching on my, the leadership philosophy that we probably share, that
Yeah.
is made this such a fruitful connection for me, and to have that reinforcement. That is something that allows us to learn together and
Yeah.
recognize that even when somebody's in responsibility, a position of leadership, there's a position of power there, but you're not a leader if nobody's following.
Right.
So you can be a leader with, your role power and force people to do to some degree, but you start looking at what's going to be effective over the long term. And I think the
Yeah.
same thing applies to parenting. I think that the same thing applies to men that struggle in the world, is they haven't seen that example of
Yeah. Yeah.
that it really is a two-way street. They just see maybe the application of role power. I'm the authority. I have
Yeah.
oftentimes physical strength, that is, violence is the last resort to enforce my position or my thoughts or my, protecting my feelings,
Mhm.
which I think is what a lot of it comes back to. And so they don't see that the longer term rewards that come from that vulnerability and relating and not relying on that role power. And
Yeah. No, 100%. I love that. I think it's so, so important.
yeah,
Okay. Final question.
sure.
Thank you for this. This is a super good conversation. I really enjoyed it. But
Same.
kind of to wrap up, tell me about who has been a male role model. It could be someone you know or personally or not, but a male role model that you have looked at and said, "Yeah, okay, I have something to learn from this person." Um, who have you had in your life like that?
Yeah, I, there's definitely aspects that I picked from my dad and my grandparents, my grandfathers, um, all three of them. But the one that comes to mind, the one that is instrumental, and one of the most horrifying things that I read as an early parent, was that we overestimate our influence on our children
Yeah.
as parents, and that it's really their
Mhm.
community that
Mhm.
they develop as young people, especially in prepubescent to early puberty, that really impacts a lot of who they're going to be
Right.
in how they show up in the world. But for me, it would be that wrestling coach. He comes to mind because he was a person who he had a very clear list of priorities as a person, and he talked to him about us. He talked to us as people and
Yeah.
as people who are about to become adults. And he's a, rural South USA. He's saying, you've got this order of priorities. It's God, family, school, work. And
Yeah.
he goes, those are it. This is it. This is how it works.
Yeah.
And he was very straightforward, and that was a very clarifying message that he consistently sent. But how he showed up and how he was compassionate with us as people who played for him. And the wildest thing is we would have our spring banquets, and they were just tear jerkers because you
Yeah.
had all these kids who were competitive athletes who were winning things, but they would be like, coach, it's all because of you, and he's just like, oh my gosh, it was just like waterworks everywhere. But he wasn't afraid to do those things at the time, but he was also
So
very
important.
he was comfortable being very passionate and intense about what we were doing, and
Yeah.
cheering for our successes and asking more of us and setting a bar, but also tons of compassion. He
Yeah.
met you where you were.
Yeah.
And as an example for me, I liked soccer, and so the only reason I wrestled is because I wanted to be fitter for when the soccer season came around. On the advice of some friends, I
Right.
couldn't do 10 push-ups as a 10th or 11th grade
Yeah.
kid who was physically active, but there was no, he came and he put his hand under my chest and helped me do the first 10.
Yeah.
I got to
Yeah.
three maybe or whatever it was. And
Yeah.
then I couldn't do any more. Or maybe it was one. I don't even know. But he
Right.
was there to make sure it happened. And then he cheered and
Yeah.
was always encouraging. And I think that was one of the examples that I saw and has inspired me in my leadership, ever since then. How do I show up as a dad? How do I encourage
Yeah.
and support those who, and just meet them where they're at?
Yeah.
And try to hold that space for him to grow.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that example. I love that you had that. And I think one of the things you just said that is so important is like, how do we make space to talk to kids like actual humans, right?
Yeah,
Instead of talking down to them, instead of smashing them, instead of whatever, how do we say, like, what's going on in your head? And I think coaches, teachers, in some areas, folks in the religious community, our aunts and uncles, like there are spaces where other adults can also step in and be that space of compassion, right? And I think we need for all of us. There are probably some kids in our lives that we could say, "Hey, I could hold some space once in a while for this kid," right?
yeah,
And
definitely.
I
Yeah,
love
it's incredibly impactful. But I will have to give some credit where credit's due. Is my partner has been critical and going, they're four,
that.
they're seven,
Yeah.
they're eight.
So
So
maybe let them be eight, right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it is without a doubt, she is a teacher, so she studied the stages
Yeah.
and ages of development. But yeah, it's something I'm still aspiring and growing into.
Yeah.
But yeah, he
Totally.
definitely set a big, high, great standard that I still try to follow.
I love it. I love it. Jonathan, thank you for talking to me today. It's been so much fun to have this conversation. It's
Yeah,
insightful. If you're watching this, there is a QR code in the corner where you can donate to Movember, which is an organization that really raises awareness for prostate and testicular cancer and also men's mental health, the crisis of men's mental health right now. So if you want to donate, you can go there and donate to this cause. And we will celebrate International Men's Day on November 19th. So it does exist, even though people say it doesn't. So we have one. It's not 364 of them, but there is one. So we will celebrate that. And thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing your perspective. I really appreciate
my
it.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.